The conversation continues at LarsLarson.com.
Will you bring me a gun, please?
Everybody knows Lars loves guns.
I'm a citizen with a constitutional right to bear arms.
And he also loves the Second Amendment. Let's face it, America isn't America without guns.
All right, that does it. It's time to bring out the big gun.
Protecting your right to bear arms every day. This is the Lars Larson Show.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. As we head up toward Christmas 2016, it is a pleasure to be with you and a real pleasure to welcome Tim Schmidt, who is the president and the founder of the United States Concealed Carry Association. Tim, your group does great work, and thanks for joining me on this Wednesday.
Hey, Lars, it's an honor to be on your show today. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So what should Americans make of the decision by Ohio Governor John Kasich to sign a bill earlier this week that allows concealed carry on college campuses and at daycares? I know it's likely to, send the liberals off into a frenzy, but I like the idea.
I couldn't agree more. I have to admit I'm a little surprised. I mean, Governor Kasich is certainly not the most conservative of Republicans. Some would consider him maybe a bit of a rhino. And so I applaud his effort to pass this bill, because ultimately what he's doing, he's telling the citizens of Ohio that yes, I trust you. I believe that you can be that first line of defense for your family. And he's saying that to the students in his colleges as well.
So how can we get this spread to some of the other states? Because I know that there are people who say, a daycare center? A gun in a daycare center? Well, in the state I have my studios in Oregon, I can carry a gun in a high school, and I have. I can carry a gun in an elementary school or a daycare or a church or almost any place except the post office and the federal building. Yeah. And
right.
And in a quarter of a century of that law being in place, and about 24 years of me doing it, I've never seen a problem. I've never seen a news story about anybody causing any ruckus, but I've seen plenty of stories about citizens who've been the good guy with the gun that answers the bad guy with the gun.
Oh, my goodness, Lars, you're exactly correct. And that's the crazy thing is that when you think about it, why wouldn't you want a responsibly armed American in a daycare center? I mean, ultimately, what are we protecting in our daycare centers? We're protecting our youngest children. I mean, the most important members of our society. Those are the people that you want to protect. And, I reflect on some of the stories that unfortunately you don't hear in the mainstream media. For example, just a couple months ago in St. Cloud, Minnesota, a responsibly armed citizen who honestly was actually carrying illegally in a shopping mall because they had posted the signs. He stopped a knife attack, but of course you never hear about that in the news, which is horrible. And what is it going to take to get this to continue across the country? Well, right now, I believe there's 8 or 9 states that allow campus carry. And honestly, I feel there's a brand new groundswell of people who understand that this isn't something that's crazy. This actually makes common sense. And ultimately what it'll do is it will empower more responsible citizens to be able to defend themselves, which I think we both agree is good.
No, I do. In fact, this is the first time we've elected a new president who's actually made it a commitment to try to get national reciprocity for concealed carry. And Tim, I know that a lot of those people in the audience don't have carry permits. They're not that familiar. It may even spook them a little bit to hear about people talking about carrying guns, but I think there are 12 to 15 million carry permits in the country. But the weird thing about it is that even though the standards for getting one are a lot tougher than the standards for getting a driver's license, and even though a driver's license allows you to operate a vehicle that too frequently in America, will take people's lives, that you don't have to check. If I live in the state of Washington, if I want to drive all the way to Florida, I don't have to check with Idaho and Utah and Oklahoma and Nevada and Nebraska and every other state I drive. I don't have to call and say, hey, is my Washington state driver's license good in Oklahoma? Is it good in Nebraska? You don't even think about it. In fact, if you said that to people who don't have carry permits, they say, well, of course your driver's license is good in all states. And I said, but hold on. They're handed out under very different standards. I mean, they're all generally in the same area. You're 16, you can get a driver's license, and you generally have to take a written test and a driving test. But the requirements are dramatically different. I've checked this, and yet we give nationwide reciprocity for that. You have to meet the much higher standard for a carry permit, and they say, oh, that one's only good in your state. You can't use it anywhere else. That's crazy.
Oh, Lars is absolutely crazy. And to address your first point, I mean, you're correct. There are 14.5 million responsibly armed citizens that have concealed carry permits all across the country. They carry guns on a daily basis. And for those of you, for those of your listeners who may find this disconcerting, well, guess what? The good news is that these people, almost nothing happens. They're the good guys. They're the ones that are out there that are preventing the crimes, that are dissuading criminals from doing bad stuff. And so now to get to your other point about the whole reciprocity thing, it is absolutely crazy that good, responsibly armed citizens that have to go through tremendous amount of training and credentials to get that permit. You're right. They literally, and not only is the reciprocity thing change, it literally changes on a quarterly basis. Every time every state legislature is in session, there's different reciprocity. So it is almost impossible to know which state recognizes your permit. And if I can just throw one more point on here, Lars,
sure.
That it's one thing to drive in a state without a license, and maybe you're going to get slapped on the wrist. But if you show up in some state without a concealed carry permit with a gun, guess what?
You're going to jail.
You're going to jail, exactly.
Well, and not only that, Tim, but I tell people when they say, well, we ought to have the same requirements for guns that we have for cars. And I say, okay, let's do this. Have you ever driven to the store and realized, or driven to work, realized, I left my purse or my wallet at home? And you say, well, and most people say, yeah, I forgot my driver's license. I said, have you ever been pulled over and didn't have your driver's license? And occasionally that happens. I said, what would you think if we had a rule like for guns that if you're ever pulled over in a car and you don't have a current license, you will never be allowed to own a car again, you'll never be allowed to drive a car again for the rest of your life? And people say, well, that's crazy. I said, well, that's the rule for guns. So, What if we adopted that rule for cars that said, if you ever drove one time on a suspended license, I've never had one of those, but I can imagine that people get tempted. There are a lot of people who drive with suspended licenses and say, from this point forward, you can never possess a car again. You can never drive a car again. They say, well, that's nuts. And I said, well, that's the standard we have to operate under.
Such an amazing, unfair double standard, especially when you factor in the fact that owning a firearm, the concept of self-defense, I mean, it's a natural-born right that's affirmed by the Second Amendment of our Constitution. And so we shouldn't have to be jumping through hoops and begging for permission to exercise this right. It makes no sense to me at all.
No, it doesn't. Listen, you have a Merry Christmas and keep up the great work at the U.S. Concealed Carry Association, Tim.
Lars, thank you very much. God bless.
And God bless to you as well. Merry Christmas. Let's go to JW in West Texas. Hey, JW, what's on your